I think the biggest issue facing America is the wage gap. Salaries have been stagnant. CEO pays have skyrocketed. How can we convince corporations to pay higher salaries when their responsibility is to stockholders?
In a moment, you're going to see Pete Buttigieg do something a lot of folks on the left shy away from, stepping into spaces that aren't exactly friendly territory. The question he has posed is pretty simple. How the hell do we expect billionaires to do something they've never done? Stop siphoning money out of the system. Spoiler alert, they're not going to do it on their own.
How can we convince corporations to pay higher salaries when their responsibility is to stockholders?
Well, it can't just be pretty please. I mean, this is where if the corporation, we have to either change the incentives on the front end so that there are tax advantages to taking better care of your people, or we have to be ready to do it through policy where this country says you're going to make $100 billion in wealth off of work that 100,000 people working for you generated. More of that needs to be going to them.
Yeah, it really is that simple. When you lay it out clearly, calmly, and directly, taxing the rich a little bit more just makes sense. And look, I don't know who all the dudes on that podcast are. I don't listen to it very often or really at all or ever, but I've seen clips, as we all have. But Andrew Schultz is an old buddy of mine from the comedy world, and I do know that the show seems to sit pretty squarely in the brosphere, in the manosphere of podcasts that is the same ecosystem that helped elect Donald Trump. So it's a little bit incongruous to hear the people on this podcast embracing left-leaning ideas, but I'll take it. And here's Pete Buttigieg walking into that space, directly challenging Trump's entire tax agenda, the one designated to reward billionaires at everybody else's expense. And what I found most striking, and that I have to hand them a lot of credit for, is that these hosts actually listen intently. And by the end of the conversation, they're nodding along. They're agreeing with the basic truth. If we're serious about fixing income inequality, it starts by making the wealthiest pay their fair share, and maybe even implementing some other policies, like perhaps an AI dividend or whatever it might be, that can just help people get lifted up by being rewarded for the resources that we have all put in to help build these vast resources and this vast wealth.
And I think there's a way to deal in American citizens on kind of like a dividend off of the value that's being created from AI and from, I don't want to take it down a whole rabbit hole, but if you imagine...
UBI kind of thing?
How's that?
Like a universal basic income kind of thing?
It could be. There's different ways to structure it. But I think it's giving everybody a share in the overall value that's being created by technologies, which again rest on technologies that the taxpayer paid for in the first place back in the 60s. So why shouldn't we all get a share?
Yeah, we're investing it.
Instead of it all going to this tiny handful of super, super wealthy people.
I mean, Mayor Pete pretty much introduced some of the farthest left political beliefs right there to a room full of right-leaning guys. And even Andrew Schultz is like, let's go, comrade. I like it. We did all pay into it. Because if we're ever going to rebuild anything close to a real middle class in America, we can't just rely on electing billionaires and then expecting them to regulate themselves. It's going to have to start with the people at the top choosing to stop bleeding us dry. And the way to do that is to not elect people that are going to make rules only for those people. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. It is, because for some reason, more than 50% of the nation, the vast majority of which are not billionaires, only vote in people that are making mostly policies for billionaires because they're very good at marketing, better than we are at marketing. So there's that. We on the left, not great marketers. But it shouldn't be partisan. And it's not about debating or shouting matches. It's about showing up, listening, and meeting people where they are, sometimes on their kind of broy podcasts. Pete does that here.
We have to have a tax policy that does that. We have to have a system that requires people who amass that kind of wealth to be sharing it with citizens. Because again, I know there's this myth. Look, I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs who create things, and they should be hugely rewarded when they create things that are valuable. But they created those things based partly on infrastructure that all of us paid for, right? And by infrastructure, I don't just mean roads and bridges. I mean national security. I mean things like inventing the internet or mRNA vaccine technology or whatever it is. But more broadly, and this is both on the substance and the politics, I think you're naming something that's hugely important, which is the inequality in this country. doesn't get talked about enough.
Buttigieg walked right into the Flagrant podcast and in plain language made the case for how we on the left see the world. And he's one of the best at it, no doubt. When he goes into Fox News, he does it all the time. He owns them when he has to be aggressive, but when places like this can be more interested in a true, real, regular conversation, he does that beautifully as well and takes complex ideas and breaks them down into a way that is hard to disagree with. And this is how you talk to people who don't agree with you politically, typically. This is how you change minds. This is how you flip votes. Too often, the manosphere or the podcast bro crowd gets written off as being part of the far right fringe. But not everybody in those spaces is on the far right. Not everybody there is fringe. Some are just guys who've really never had a real chance to hear the other side or haven't sought it out at least. And not just for the bros sitting on the couch around them, but for the hundreds of thousands that watch their podcast, this is a moment. This is a chance for them to learn a little bit about some other ideas and to open their minds a little bit. And maybe it's working. I mean, check out some of the reaction from Pete's appearance. As a Republican, Pete came across as incredibly well-spoken and intelligent in this episode. This dude can condense very complicated ideas into something that's easily digestible to the average American. I could definitely see him being the next president. I am a Republican, but Pete seems like a chill dude. Seems like the type of dude I would sit down and have a beer with. I didn't listen to the whole podcast. I hope that they are aware that he is a gay man and would still be down to have that beer. But this is progress. This is in the right direction. Not a Dem, but Pete here is the real deal. Great episode. Don't know a lot about Pete. Seems like he's one of the Democrats that can take a joke and make good ones as well. Not bad. Not bad. I expected nothing less. All the leftists / MAGA that loved attacking him did it out of spite and intimidation. They know he connects authentically with the average person and that people are endeared to his incredible brilliance. Has any prominent leftist outlet even invited him? So this is good news. It speaks to a world in which people can listen to each other, where people can go into opposing podcast worlds and get themselves heard and maybe open up some eyes and some ears. And I might have an announcement along those lines coming at you in the near future. In the meantime, you can listen to the most recent episode of my podcast, Last Week on Earth, where I did a pilot episode of a podcast I may be doing called Wrong Side of History, where I talked to a Trump supporter and we debated all the most recent issues. And it was a very interesting conversation. It's interesting to see where we disagreed and where we agreed. We need a lot more of that in this country. Listening to each other, talking to each other, agreeing and even disagreeing, but to our faces with honest, good faith conversations, not twisting information like Donald Trump just did when he presented a photo of the tattoos of Abrego Garcia, the man who was here for so many years, was never accused of a crime, is married here, and was deported to El Salvador, and he puts his fist tattoos and writes the words MS-13 on top, but he photoshopped those in, Donald Trump did, just to show his interpretation of the 4 tattoos on his knuckles. Show the tattoos. Show your evidence that he's in MS-13, but Photoshop the stuff above the knuckles so most people who aren't discerning aren't tricked into believing that he actually has the letters directly MS-13 tattooed on his fist, because that's bad faith. But nobody's ever accused Donald Trump of doing things ethically or morally, so I guess he does have that going for him and against him, and mostly against him. I'm Ben Gleib for Rebel HQ. You can follow me at Ben Gleib on Instagram for lots more.